come here. Shh. Hey. Shh. Switzerland doesn't just speak German, French, Italian. They're hiding another language, a fourth language, up in the mountains. What is it? I'll tell you. So, welcome, I'm Benjamin, and may I introduce you to Switzerland. Now, to talk about this language, I need to get into the geography or linguistic geography of Switzerland. So, the three languages that you're probably familiar with: French, spoken in Romandy, this part of Switzerland, in the west, and the majority, a slight majority, I guess, 2/3, is that a slight majority? They speak German here. And you have a bit on the south who speak Italian there. But you also have this language Romansh in the canton or administrative municipality. There are 26 of these across Switzerland, spoken in Grisons here, Grischun or Graubunde or Grigioni in the various languages. And we're going to be talking about this mostly. A town of significance there is Chur. There's various ways to pronounce it, like most towns in Switzerland. So if I didn't get that right, I'm sorry. But that's where we're talking about. And this language is spoken by less than 1% of Switzerland. It's a Romance language. With my French, I can look at it written and I can get what it's saying. I would not be able to get spoken, but it's definitely influenced by German. There's a lot of sounds in it which come from the trickle of German influence over the centuries. The area where Romansh would form before the Romans came along, they were in an interesting mix, actually. They spoke a pre-Indo-European language, Rhaetian, and Celtic languages were moving in at the time. And I made a video on Etruscan. This may have been part of that language family. We're not sure. In any case, Rome came in the year 15 BC and they took over. This would gradually emerge into the province of Rhaetia Prima, and they would be ruled by Rome for the next 500 years. That's quite significant, and given how much more advanced Rome was than mountain shepherds, it's no coincidence that the language became Latinized. But even today, this language Romansh has elements that are clearly pre-Indo-European, at least in a few vocabulary words, and Celtic. So that's an interesting thing. It immediately separates it from Italian and French just because of having this other influence. But after the Roman Empire, you had the Ostrogoths come in. The Ostrogothic kingdom. And around 537, the Ostrogoths handed over this province to the Frankish Empire, who continued to have locals ruling the Duchy of Chur. However, after 765, Charlemagne assigned a Germanic duke to the region. Now Charlemagne the Great, lording over the Frankish Empire at that point, or beginnings of the Holy Roman Empire, There were archdioceses and cours ingressants. This is just a diocese, not an archdiocese. In 843, there was the Treaty of Verdun. So the Frankish Empire built by Charlemagne, really. Charlemagne the Great. Morphing into the Holy Roman Empire. This was divided amongst his three sons. And Cour, this town in Grisons, it was shifted because it had a bishopric, okay? But they answer to archbishops, or archdioceses rather. They answered to archdioceses, and its archdiocese for this diocese was moved from Milan to Mainz. So basically from northern Italy to the German-speaking lands to the north. The cultural emphasis and tilt shifted from Romance-speaking world to Germanic in this time. And from this time, the German influence is increasing. Okay? And this eventually leads to the Germanization, eventually, of Grisons. And this would have a long-term impact upon this language. From this point, German is increasingly influencing this language. It's quite early, but it wasn't affecting its territory yet, its territorial integrity. At the time, Rumantsch was spoken over a much wider area, stretching from present-day Tyrol in northern Italy all the way up to the Walensee Sea, one of the larger lakes in Switzerland, going up towards Germany. But these northern areas became German-speaking by the 12th century, and by the 15th century, the Rhine Valley and areas around the Walensee Sea were entirely German-speaking. But the language shift was long, a drawn-out process, with larger towns adopting German first, and then the periphery slowly becoming Germanized. Now, this happens with any language as it retreats. You lose the towns first, and then the language becomes spoken mainly by the farmers or the agricultural people. As soon as you lose the financiers, the merchants in the towns, that's the prestige language. And so Romansh lost the prestige, but it was still in control of a large geography, and it was producing works in the language, or it was about to. In the 1270s, a large German-speaking population began settling in the sparser populated areas within the Romansh heartland. The Germanization of Cour had long consequences. In particular, this town was the heartland of the Romansh area because it was an urban enclave, majority Romansh speaking. But in 1465 there was a fire in Cour, and afterwards a lot of German workers were brought in, or German speaking workers, and the language shifts, and the Romansh speakers lose Cour as being a majority Romansh speaking town, urban environment. And this 1465 is really when the backbone of the language is broken and German truly begins to take over. However, the upper valleys were still clearly Romansh speaking. Jean Travers wrote the first surviving work in Romansh. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, but let's have a go. Chanson de la guerra d'Agui Tiaste d'Amus. It's an epic poem written in 1527, describing the First Musa War, kind of a war between these Confederate states on the plateau of present-day Switzerland. Not long after this, there were smaller religious works being produced. A book of Psalms in 1562. But these were not all in the same dialect. These were coming from different valleys who spoke a very different version of this language, almost different languages And so as written works began to be produced through the later 16th century, they were writing them with different words, even different spellings for the same word in many cases, but not just different spellings, different pronunciations. You would look at the same word and you wouldn't even know it's the same word. And this began to be a problem. There was no unification. The communication was broken within the bridge of speakers across this plateau of valleys. And the language was decentralizing into almost patois at this point. But in 1717 to 1719, you got the first actual full Bible published in this language. That's significant because at the time, if someone said, "Oh, you're a language, huh? Where's your Bible?" I got it here. We're a language now. You understand? We are Romansh. So that was big. That was big. This period during the Reformation was quite significant because Romansh was at the crossroads of Protestant and Catholic in many instances for power struggles. People were forced to produce works in this language of a religious nature on both sides of the argument. So we've got a really good microscopic look into the Protestant Reformation and Counter-Reformation through the Romansh language, because both sides were competing for this area, and they realized they had their own language, so that gave them a bit of political cultural power. However, when Napoleon came along in the French Revolution, things changed quite suddenly. Napoleon was a bit of a narcissist. He wanted to reshape Europe in his image. Went around redrawing borders to suit his own personal feelings about the French state. Grisons became a canton of Switzerland in 1803. That's significant because the political power, shifts. German began to creep up the valleys, and Romansh began to lose ground. Now, there was never a plan to Germanize the area of Grisons. It was just happening slowly, naturally, because up to the north, around Zurich, Bern, there was industry growing, people wanting a better life, moving out. And even the larger towns up in the valleys began to break up in terms of a territorial integrity of being Romansh speaking in the late 19th century. You can see here from 1803 to 1980, it drops from being 50% down to 21.9% of Grisons. But here's the thing, the overall number of people able to speak it from 1803 until that date, 1980, only decreased a few hundred. It's the percentage. And that means you have a large group of people speaking it, but it's diluted amongst a bigger group. People were aware of what was happening, and a revival movement began, called the Rhéto-Romansh Renaissance. Not quite a nationalist revival, just a cultural, linguistic revival. These people were very proud to be Swiss. Swiss is a multilingual state. People were aware that they had an inheritance they did not want to lose. And this is optimistic. People were aware of what was happening, and they set about beginning at that time, building institutions to stop it. By the end of the 19th century, teaching materials were actually taking Romansh culture into consideration, rather than just translating from German. An improvement, yet again, of awareness, self-awareness of the culture. Throughout the late 19th century and early 20th century, you had grammar books being produced, dictionaries, but these dictionaries were being published in various dialects 5 major dialects, there was nothing unifying them, and it confused people because no one wanted a standardized version that did not reflect how they speak it. And so they had nothing in terms of an aspirational Romansh language to build on. In 1880, the ridge of Romansh speakers across Grisons was still continuous. But as we go into the 20th century, this began to break up into islands of Romansh speaking areas. By the 1930s, they were bounded by fascists on 2 sides. Mussolini to the south wanted to unite Italian-speaking peoples along the Adriatic Sea, which had been outside Italian control, and in Switzerland. And to the north, Hitler came to power, wanting to unite all the German-speaking lands. And the Germans of Switzerland were not really on board with this. So not only did the German of Switzerland staunchly turn around and leave this standardized German that was being produced in favor of their own German, but Romansh became officially a national language, as they saw it as a way of saying, look, we're not the same country as Germany or Italy. We're not going to just go quietly into this fascism if it comes to that. Let's promote our own national language to show that we are our own people. And so Romansh had a little boost. There were schools, nurseries built. There were educational materials built during this World War II era to promote a Swiss identity that was not connected to Germany. So if these 5 main dialects, there are others, but these 5 dialects, Sir Sylvan, Sut Sylvan, Sumiran, Puter, Velader. With these 5 dialects, there's a bit of confusion about which word to use, because look at this. For the word dog, all of these are the same word, just for something as simple as dog. Different spellings, different pronunciations, different influences either from Italian or German. Look at house, a very simple word again. All of these. When you're looking in a dictionary, there's no clear indication upon which one you're going to use, because all of the dialects are trying to be equal in terms of a standard. Now you do have this Romance Christian, which is trying to unify them, but these dialects, they don't agree on using this, to their detriment, I would say. In Romansh, in some instances, it's not even clear if it's the same language. Some of the ones further south are much more Italian-like. So with these dialects all teaching their own, these valleys could not really unite in terms of the language. And so in the middle of the 20th century, efforts really began to pick up to have a standard version of this language that people could learn. Romansh Grishum. And they decided by the 1970s, we need to do something about it. And in 1994, leaders of these areas came together and chose Romansh Grishum. But people who speak it as their native language, they didn't really like it very much, because it didn't sound like, the language that they spoke in their tiny, tiny community. And so they would rather turn to German when speaking with other people, rather than speak a dialect that was slightly different of their own language. That is how a language dies. There is hope. If this was in France, the state would not even support it. The Swiss state is supporting this. There's hope. Now, despite these numbers, it's not all doom and gloom in the room. There's education in this language. It's got official recognition as a national language, which is more than any of the languages in France or smaller languages in France can claim. I mean, the French state's attitude towards languages is, it's uncivilized, it's barbaric. So at least Romansh is not under that kind of dark shadow. It has state support at some level. It's even been on banknotes. And that contrast, I think, means Romansh potentially has a potential future, a good one. What do you think? There is a lot of hope. Romansh is still being taught in some schools, and especially more and more being used in higher education to set aside the regional differences. So I think it's not all bad. It has official status in the canton of Grisons, which is way more than any language apart from French in France has. So that's a plus. And there are schools opening up, so I don't think it's as doom and gloom as some of the videos on this language have shown. Yeah, it's retreated, there are islands, but there's government support, and children are being taught in this language. So we'll see what the future holds. What do you think? Is it doom and gloom? Is it over? Or is there hope for the future of this language? Just looking at this language, using my French, I can understand quite a bit of it. And with exposure to German, I can see that this language has picked up a lot of sounds and words from German, which I find interesting. It's part of that line between the German and Romance speaking worlds, which produces so many interesting dialects and languages. So I enjoy looking at this language. And for you watching today, do you think this language has a chance? I mean, with it having some basic support, more so than what it would have been given in France, maybe there is hope. But it's not a prestige language, there's not a lot of resources in it, and it is an uphill battle. Or in this case, downhill to the towns. Right, I tried to make that joke work, but we'll see you next time. Deel en Boreal.